Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just what you wanted to do was start your Sunday out talking about death, right? Something very uplifting. But that kind of underscores the point of talking about death, because it's something that we kind of, as a culture, don't really want to talk about, and we kind of want to avoid altogether. But this whole idea in this talk is to dispel the notion of being afraid of death, not thinking about our own death, and what we can do in our own lives to prepare better for that. And we learn wonderful lessons from our work with the animals. And so I thought I'd share that process of how that unfolded through working with the animals and how we learn about our own death, eventual death. So ironically, the word yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yoke, which originally came from the word yoke as in yoking of oxen, the yoke that oxen pull a plow in the field. So animal use by man actually predates yoga, because the word yoga was borrowed from, animal use, ironically. So it's taken on many meanings over time, including the idea that yoga is not just the idea of union, but it also implies a practice or a method of some sort of life achievement or some kind of spiritual practice. So that's where I coined the term sanctuary yoga. I thought, wow, the sanctuary work itself is kind of like a practice in and of itself. So sanctuary yoga. And it brings in other Eastern ideas of how to approach death that we mostly in the West don't think of. I mean, it's not an easy topic, but it's something I think that we're so glaringly missing and not thinking about in our lives, because it sounds kind of contradictory to say, some people say, well, why do I want to think about death throughout my life? And in the Eastern thinking, it's the opposite. You should think about your death all the time. You should contemplate your death throughout your life, because through that, you'll improve the quality of your life, and it'll transform your life, and in turn give yourself a better death when that time comes. So I know some of us, we've all probably lost a loved one, have experienced death of our own, through either a pet or a family member or a loved one or a friend. So we all have some level of experience with death. But Buddha actually was known to say you should use your life as a preparation for death. Now people are like, why would you do that? That's so, life negating. But really it's meant in the sense of not being life negating. It's to think about your death, to transform your life, and be ready. So there's no surprises when it does come, whether it be sudden or slow. I'm going to start off with a little slideshow, so illustrate these points a little bit better. So the idea that dying could be a peaceful experience is one that we learned from the animals. They teach you, through the experience of giving them a good death, about death itself. So the process is kind of in stages. So number one, through our practice, is to expect death. There should be no surprises or unexpected deaths, especially in the animals we rescue, because basically you're going to outlive virtually every animal that you rescue. So in order to avoid what they call compassion fatigue in your staff or in yourself, you have to have a good, clear, healthy understanding that you're going to lose all these beings. And that when that time comes, there's a way of handling that so that it's a healthy way of handling that. A lot of times people go through this process, they can't handle the emotional toll, the grief is too heavy for them, it takes its toll on your volunteers and on your staff members, and so there's a short life for being able to work with animals in the sanctuary movement, because people get too freaked out and the loss is just too much for them. Recently we had a chicken who died, dare I say unexpectedly, but who was found, she was in the prime of her life, very energetic, loved life. One of our staff members had taken her under her wing and, became best friends with her, and then found her just dead one day. So everything stopped on the sanctuary that day. We call the whole entire staff together, and we take a moment of silence, and we sit around and we support each other and make sure that everyone's okay, and we're, just comforting one another during that process. The second step in that process is the realization that their time has come, especially with a big animal. If they can't stand up anymore, even if they show the desire to still live and they're not ready emotionally to die, you really can't keep a large animal down once their legs cannot support them anymore, which happens a lot in sanctuary rescue because they're overbred, and when they live past their window of time from what they were, quote, designed to live, their legs can't hold their big bodies up because they continue to grow. So it's one of those things you have to kind of make that tough decision to put that life, out of its misery. So that's kind of the realization that time has come is the second stage. The third stage is that you realize that this time is very sacred. If anyone's ever been in the presence of a loved one who is dying, you know that suddenly all the world becomes like very real and true and honest and pure at that moment. All the little problems of life are just forgotten during that time of sacredness, because it is a sacred thing that's happening. So we realize that the animals really bring that into focus when it's their time. So because we've given them a good life through rescue and took them from a previous situation of unpleasant life that they lived, either in a factory farm or being raised for meat, when their death comes, we make sure that we're fully present for that, and that we give them what they call in Buddhism a good death. So, and that just means being present with them, and that just means looking them in the eye and stroking them and being there with them to make their transition smoother. One thing we make sure we don't do is we never question or regret our decision to euthanize an animal. You can beat yourself up later. Did we do the right thing? Could she have lived more? Could we have spent more money keeping her alive? You have to stand behind the decision once you make that decision. Otherwise, you'll just completely beat yourself up over that decision. And that's just not that doesn't help the animal, and that doesn't help you. So you make the decision that it's time, and then you stand behind that decision. So let's do. This is Ruckus. Ruckus was like most goats, very gregarious, loved life, but like a lot of those animals, his legs started to give out. So I wanted to show it in pictures because it's so, clear when you see the pictures. But Ruckus, time had come. We built a little makeshift sling because his legs had given out, which gave him a little extra time. He really tried so hard to want to make his legs work again, but it just wasn't happening. So the day had come, and we scheduled for the vet for his euthanization to come at the end of the day so that we can use that entire day as Ruckus's day. So we set up a little comfortable area with hay bales in his favorite spot to sit. And it was almost like he knew what was happening. He really did, but he was super present all day. We stayed with him. We made him a lunch of black beans and kale. We sat and drank tea, and we spent the whole day waiting for the vet to come later in the day, just giving Ruckus one more good day of life. Here it was. And he got to stare out on the pasture of his friends, which was his thing to do. So this is just before the vet came. Do you have more for that? Yeah, and you can see he's kind of dignified. He doesn't look scared. And it was just kind of an acceptance on his part. The animals have a very dignified way of dealing with death. They don't bring the anxiety all the time. I shouldn't say always, but most of the time, they're very dignified and almost like they know that it's their time, and they deal with it on a more calm, seems like sane level than a lot of us do. So, okay. So at least you got a little glimpse of, you can get the feel of how his last couple hours were. He was great. I want to give you some quotes. Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies in us while we're still alive. And again, the animals amplify and bring into focus this idea of, that death is not the most horrible thing. You might be thinking in your mind, what about slaughter death? Now, this is something we don't deal with in the sanctuary world, but no talk about death would be complete without mentioning, the other animals that don't get rescued. So one time we were talking to a Hindu Swami, and we asked him about all those animals and their karma and, what happens. And he said, because they're suffering so much, and this was his take on it, that their karma is completely wiped clean because of the amount of suffering they go through. So it's a little bit comforting on some level to know that maybe the death they're going through, again, we'll never know for sure, but the death they're going through wipes their karmic slate clean because of the high degree of suffering involved in that death. So do you want to go to Tinkerbell? The Tinkerbell, like most of us, loved life, and he was a big, big, lovable, furry, fragile guy. He loved to play and run around, and like all of them, his legs and body started to give out. His rear legs, weren't able to support him anymore. And because he was so loved, like some of the animals, people came to say their last respects, which is hard. We can't really do that with humans in our world because we don't really know exactly when they're going to die. But when we can plan the euthanization of an animal, you can actually have those that really love that animal come and visit them and say goodbye for the last time. And so you can see some of these little girls really didn't even know what was going on, but they knew through their parents, that he was going to go away soon. So they came and visited him that day and paid their last respects in the best way they knew how at that age. That's amazing. I want to move to the idea of grief. Just because we have a positive and healthy attitude about death does not mean we don't experience some level of grief. You will definitely will grieve, but the grieving process has to itself be something that's healthy. It's an acceptance of what's happening, and it's also real. The loss is real. So even though, again, if we have a healthy attitude and we live our lives preparing for death, that doesn't mean we're not going to grieve the loss of those individuals. But the grieving process seems to be shorter and more profound since we've been cultivating this healthy attitude about life and death. So just wanted to make sure we mentioned that, we're not cold stones being like, oh, death is part of life and not grieving. We definitely grieve. The loss is real, but it's not devastating. You want to move on to next one? So Penny was the grande dame of the sanctuary. She was raised as a breeding cow. So year after year after year, had babies, was impregnated, and the babies were immediately taken away from her. And Penny never seemed to hold a grudge against humans or the world because of that. She kept a great attitude. She inspired people. She was wonderful for being teaching. Because she was so gentle, people were allowed to approach her and stand by her and spend time with her without having to worry about getting hurt or stepped on. She was so calm and gentle, and her movements were so deliberate that you could actually bring people and young people and children up to her, and the mere presence of her was a rare thing. How many times in life do you get to go, near a large animal like that without worried of being hurt? So Penny was like that. She was an amazing cow. If you look into some of our blogs, you'll see in the responses how many people's lives were touched by the presence of Penny and the time they spent with her. So this was Penny the day she was to be euthanized. We spent an amazing amount of time with her. She was totally dignified through the process. She started to become, her legs again got weak and couldn't hold her body up anymore. We tried. We had a sling, a large animal sling. We would crank her up and try to see if she still had some life left in her legs. And when the realization comes that that's not going to happen, then their time comes. So we had people coming to say goodbye. Now, this picture might look like it's prolonged, but it was really a short time. It wasn't like we let Penny sit there for days and days for people to come. It was just a couple hour window. But in the days leading up to that, a lot of people did come and pay last respects to her before she was actually scheduled to die. And as you can see, she was really touched the lives of a lot of people. And she loved us. So that's just her during her more, her healthy days. So that's the last penny shot. Okay. If you ever read Indra's blog about Indraloka Sanctuary, most of the stories actually end up being about the animal's death, and with a positive spin on it, because the feedback is always, thank you for this story, it's so beautiful. So to see that kind of reaction in people is amazing, and I think it's because we really need to talk about this subject. It's a hard thing to talk about, it really is, and I don't want to minimize death, but I also want to encourage all of you to think about it and incorporate that into your daily thinking about life. It really does put a different twist on the way we live. It takes care of a lot of the little problems. And at the end, I'm going to recommend a very good book for everyone that just is an unbelievable life guide that we keep by our sides when we do this animal work, because otherwise it can be very, very devastating without the proper, perspective. Sometimes we rescue an animal who's probably not going to live very long at all, but we will take them out of the situation they're in just to give them a good death, even if they're not going to spend time at the sanctuary. So if they're scheduled for euthanization or they're not, their bodies aren't suited to live, sometimes we'll just rescue them and take them and give them good death, like without any time at the sanctuary, because the alternative is far worse. To leave them, at the hands of the industry would mean to just have them go through. Naturally, we can't do that with every animal, but there are times when we rescue an animal, keep them for a day or two just to give them a good death, because we realize if you intervene and you give any being love just before their death, it makes, we believe, anywhere they go better. Now, if anybody have ever heard about the Toronto Pig Save, the Bearing Witness, and what Anita Cranch has taught to people, is what they do. They bear witness when the slaughterhouse trucks come to the corner, stop at the red light. The activists all rush up to the truck. They give the pigs water and tell them I love you and give them melon and something different, because the belief is that it makes a huge difference in their death and where they go if they just get that little dose of love 5 minutes before the truck turns into the slaughterhouse. Now, my first reaction to bearing witness was, gee, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see those animals. I don't want to look into that truck and see the horror in the eyes of the pigs or the cows. But once I did that, I was so glad I did, because it made such a difference to those animals in that brief minute of time, that small window. If you believe in karma and wherever we go, it could only be a better thing to have an intervention of love at that last second prior to death. So, it wouldn't be complete talk about death without discussing the whole spectrum of death. So, do we have another animal? Is that it? Okay. Well, the one example I wanted to talk about was Mo. Mo, do you think you can tell Mo's story for me? Because I think you know it so much better than I do. And I will take the mic back.
Mochrid was a beautiful little cow, baby cow. She had been born on a dairy farm to a farmer not so far from us. And this is a farmer that I spoke with a lot because he told me that, and he continues to say that he doesn't like his work. But he continues to do it. And I've often been able to get little bull calves from him because he has told me how terrible he feels when he sends them for veal. But he still does it because he believes that it's all that he can do. So, anyway, so that's a side issue. But he called me one day and he said, I have a little calf born here and she has crooked legs. I don't know if any of you have seen little calves like this. You can look on our website and see pictures, but she was born with her front legs couldn't straighten out. And he said, I can't breed her, so she's no good as a dairy cow, and I'm going to send her to slaughter unless you can take her. So we took Mo, and Mo is a good example of someone who I thought probably I would just literally be bringing her there to die. Just better than going to the slaughterhouse. So we brought her to the sanctuary, and we tried everything. We got her on a trailer and took her to experts, bovine experts, and then bovine veterinary experts really don't care too much about keeping them alive if they can't be bred. So then I took her to horse experts because horse vets, right, want the horses to be able to walk because the horses are quote unquote worth money. We believe they have inherent value. But anyway, so we took her to all these specialists, and the bottom line was the condition was too far gone. It was too severe, and they couldn't correct the legs. So a Holstein, baby Holstein, grows 3 pounds a day. So you can imagine what was happening. So as she was growing bigger, she was still able to get around. She sort of crabbed around, really. She would, walk with her bent legs and then, move her front legs forward. And all the other cows in the pasture were so gentle to her and so kind with her. And they would walk more slowly, for her to keep up with them. It was really just beautiful. But the day came, probably about 6 months after we got her, the day came where she was too big. And she couldn't hold herself up anymore. And it was getting cold out. And it was November, we were about to go into winter and couldn't have her stuck on the ground. Their large bodies the weight of their bodies will compress their organs and they'll die slowly if they're down too long. And B, of course, just being on the cold ground without being able to get up, without your body working properly, will cause pneumonia. So there was no good solution for her. So we decided that we had to, and by the way, her name Mochrid, it means my heart. And my belief is that Penny named her, because Penny, when we first got Mo, Penny walked right up to her and put her nose right on her heart in a really gentle, intentional way. So that day came for Mo, and, we gathered round. It was actually me and a bunch of cows. There was nobody else there. All the cows in the herd put their noses on her. And I had her head in my lap, and the vet came, and so we said a prayer, and we sang a song, and we let her go. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful because it was right, and because she was loved. And because it doesn't matter how long we live, right? It doesn't matter how long we live. What matters is what we do with that life. And by the way, what Mo did with that life, how could I have left this part out, was she gave to everybody. This whole 6 months that she was alive, she never spent any time, you never saw her feeling sorry for herself or doing what we would do, like, oh, I can't get around, or I'm in pain, or whatever else. Every single person that came to her, you saw her giving of herself and watching them and caring for them. And we have so many hurting people come to the sanctuary, so many suffering, hurting people. And each time she would be gentle with them, and she would nudge them, and they would hug her for hours, and they would hold her. And she gave. Every minute of her life she gave, and she loved. And so at the end of that short life, she had rescued us. She had rescued so many of us, including the other cows. It wasn't just humans, you know. Her spirit was so strong and so beautiful, and I think that's probably why Johnny wanted me to tell this story, because she was all heart, and letting her go was a beautiful thing to do. And it was a thing that we had to do because we loved her enough to be without her.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was not at the sanctuary. I had come to work there right after the Mo situation happened, and I hadn't really changed my perception of death yet. I hadn't dealt with the animals yet. The first day I came to the sanctuary, I was there an hour, and Indra said to me, "Can you help me with the goat?" I was like, "Sure." So I went in the stall, and the goat had just been euthanized. And she's like, "Grab his legs, come on, we got to move with the body." And I just was like in shock. I actually declined to help because I was not prepared to deal with that so abruptly. I realized right away that this work was going to be pretty tough. But I heard about Mo from everybody there, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. All these people were so touched by this cow, and that was the beginning of my understanding of, this journey and how to change our attitude about death and how it could be a beautiful thing. So it also brings up the idea of an early death versus old age. Because we use logic and reason in our approach in our Western minds, for the most part, we think when someone dies young, it's a shame and it's tragic. And then when someone dies old, it's like, well, they had a good life, and so it's not so tragic. But we try to cultivate an idea that we don't know how long a life should be. And if you don't use logic, then that argument doesn't really make sense, because in the Eastern view, your time is your time, and there's no view on a death, a time, the length of a life. So all these things you begin to think about, and so that's why I felt it was our duty to convey this idea and talk about death so that we can keep it in mind our entire life. And if you really want to take it to the next level as a practice, think about death every moment in order to enrich your life. So I'm going to leave you with that same quote from Buddha, to use your life to prepare for death, to give yourself a good death and give yourself a good life in the process. Thank you so much, everyone.